What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today, we are going to dabble in the land of courage. This episode is fully inspired by the cover story on this month's September 2025 issue of the Monitor on Psychology. It's called Courage: Why Some People Act Despite Fear. Of course, as always, I've linked to the article below, and any other resources and articles I mention are all linked below, so you can follow along, check it out, and all of that. So in today's episode, we're going to tackle what is courage, and also a little bit of how to foster courage in our therapy work, how to help our clients be more courageous. This article references a 2007 article from the Journal of Positive Psychology that defines courage as having three aspects. Quote, "It is a voluntary action in pursuit of a worthwhile or noble goal that involves taking on a risk." And they go on to say that that risk may or may not involve fear. So being courageous doesn't just mean doing a thing that's scary, though it often does involve fear. And from this definition of courage, so much of what we do in therapy involves teaching our clients to be courageous. This could apply in so many therapeutic situations, whether somebody needs to learn how to be courageous in standing up for themselves in a difficult work situation, or maybe somebody needs to have a difficult conversation with a loved one about, unhealthy dynamics between them, or maybe someone needs to be courageous enough to accept themselves for who they are, which unfortunately is often risky on a lot of levels. One thing this article brings up that I'm going to drive home in this episode is that courage is not an innate trait. It is something that we can build up like a muscle through deliberate practice. Could it be possible that if we were well equipped as therapists in how to support clients in learning to be courageous, because it is a learned characteristic, could that potentially also help in reducing a client's symptoms, at least sometimes for some folks in certain situations? So in today's episode, we're going to just dabble a little bit into this concept of how can we teach our clients to be more courageous, and explore kind of specific examples of how this might come up in therapy and ways to build that courage muscle in our clients. I feel like there's almost always some type of disclaimer, but it's important to mention nonetheless that not only am I not an expert on teaching clients to be courageous, but this is an entire area of our field that is just wildly untapped when it comes to the amount that we know. There is no empirically validated intervention for how to build courage in our clients. There are some empirically validated interventions for the workplace to help foster workplace courage. So we're dabbling into uncharted territory. But I think it's pretty clear to me, at least, that despite the lack of empirically validated interventions, so much of what we do in counseling is helping our clients build their courage muscle. So it still feels very important to talk about, but just know I'm giving that disclaimer of there is no validated tool to help us do this. The caveat to that is I'd say so much of our empirically validated tools and interventions really are geared towards helping our clients build courage. Okay, so I'm guessing that most therapists are probably conceptually on board with the idea that supporting and building up our clients' courage is a key aspect of helping them move towards their goals, but it might sort of feel vague. How does that actually play out? So I thought it might be interesting in this episode to run through a few different types of courage and share some examples of what I think that could look like as far as how we help our clients build their courage muscle in that situation. I found this article from helpfulprofessor.com that I think does a really good job of naming types of courage and examples. So I'm going to pull from that article for this section of the episode, and I've linked to it in the description below. Okay, so the first type of courage that they reference in this article, and probably one of the easier ones to grasp, is physical courage. Quote, physical courage involves proceeding despite fear of physical harm. And a little clarification we learned from the Monitor on Psychology article that fear doesn't necessarily have to be a component, but maybe we could rephrase it as physical courage involves proceeding despite risk of physical harm. And then the fear could be present, but doesn't have to be. So one situation they present is protecting someone on the street from an attacker. Yikes. And so the threat, if you were to intervene, would be that you might also get attacked yourself. So that's the risk you're taking on. I think physical courage is one of those types of courage that we see exemplified more often. It's more heroic to have somebody who's willing to take on a physical risk for the sake of a cause that's greater than them. But at least in my experience, therapeutically, there are very few situations where a client is coming to me seeking physical courage. So I personally haven't really seen that come up in therapy, so I'm not going to give a further therapeutic example, but if you've seen it come up in therapy, feel free to leave a comment and describe, a scenario where you might see a client needing to develop their physical courage muscle. The next type of courage they share in this article is social courage. Quote, social courage is the courage to expose yourself to social situations where you may be vulnerable to embarrassment, ridicule, or discomfort. And it goes on to say, quote, people who have social anxiety might need this type of courage. They need to muster this courage whenever they enter a social situation. I think social courage is a very common therapy presentation. So some examples that they give in this article include going on a first date. And it says a threat to this might be rejection because they don't like your personality or just rejection for any reason. Ooh. Another situation this article names that requires social courage is taking a leadership role. And another situation is giving a public speech. So I'm going to try out my acting skills again today. So here is one example of what it might look like to teach a client to be courageous if they're freaking out about going on a first date. Okay, so I have this date later today and I'm freaking out. What if he doesn't like me? I mean, people go on first dates all the time. I'm a weirdo for freaking out so much. You're not a weirdo at all. Most people feel pretty nervous going into a first date. It's normal to freak out a bit, I guess, but I just feel so nervous. Is that maybe a sign that I'm not really ready to date yet? Maybe I should cancel. It takes a lot of courage to go on a first date. I mean, it's scary because you don't know how it's gonna go, if you're gonna connect well, and what they'll think of you. But courage isn't a feeling. It's a series of actions we take despite the risks of the situation. So courage in this situation might not look like waiting until your nerves go away, but making a decision that's best for you, even if you feel nervous about it. So I guess I might just feel nervous on a date. It's more important to check in on whether going on this date aligns with your goals and values. Would it be helpful to explore some of the reasons why you're interested in going on a date? And then there's any number of interventions that we might utilize to increase their social courage. We might role play, like, what do you think the worst case scenario would be on the date? Well, she, turns me down for a second date or whatever it might be. Well, let's role play that interaction so that you start to rehearse what it looks like to still be courageous in that moment, even though it's super scary. So it could be any tool, but if we're utilizing the framework of courage, I think there is a really positive momentum. Like, we are deliberately teaching our clients to be courageous and that we can loop them in on that. Like, we're not just trying to squash their social anxiety. We're just saying, hey, this is what it looks like to learn to be courageous. That's what we're doing right now. We're just practicing using that muscle. Okay, the next type of courage that this article talks about is moral courage. Quote, moral courage is the courage to stand up for your convictions despite the sense that it may end badly for you. This is a type of courage that is often exercised when your morals conflict with mainstream social views. So this is really anything that's in the category of somebody doing something because they believe that it's the right thing to do, even though it may be socially taboo or have the potential to cost them something. Moral courage is a type of courage that I think is really, rare. So some of the examples that this article gives of moral courage include civil disobedience, such as choosing to protest against laws due to moral disagreement. Another example is standing up for the oppressed. And the third example they give is conscientious objection, or choosing not to participate in something such as going to war due to moral disagreement. So it's really kind of like standing by your values in a way that goes against the mainstream or, the current of the context that you're in. This could play out a number of different ways in therapy. I think kind of most prevalent for what I see with clients is moral courage that it takes in their more immediate relationships. For example, it's a type of moral courage to be able to leave an intimate partner who is harmful in any number of ways. This one's courageous on a number of levels, potentially physically courageous, emotionally courageous, but it may also partly be a sense of moral courage. Like the way that this person is acting is not okay, and so I'm sort of whistleblowing for myself to protect myself, to get out of here or to get my kids out of here. That sort of scenario might be a more kind of expected presentation in therapy. I've also seen this type of moral courage come up in therapy if a client is considering calling out harmful behavior or inappropriate behaviors in their workplace or in religious institutions. Again, there's a lot of context where we might be kind of figuring out, like, can I actually stand up for what I believe in? Can I call out this behavior? Can I go against the status quo? Maybe I'm going on strike or I'm protesting or calling out something to HR. That's all types of moral courage. I don't know. I'm considering reporting my boss's behavior to HR, but I'm really scared. Like, what if I don't stay anonymous? Could I lose my job? People adore him, and some of my friends at work might be mad at me if they found out I reported him. Wow, that's huge. It takes a lot of courage to make a report like that. Like you said, you're up against quite a few risks, so this is a decision that's worth weighing out everything before you decide what to do. But it feels important to acknowledge that it is incredibly rare for people to speak up in these situations. So the fact that you're even considering saying something is already huge. Yeah, I guess you're right. I hadn't really thought about it like that. It is a big decision. Is this a decision you'd like to process a bit further with me? We can really weigh out all the potential benefits and risks so you can make an informed decision. Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. Absolutely. Then you can have everything mapped out in front of you and decide strategically what's most aligned. So the way I like to approach decisions like this is to see it a bit like measuring the pros and the cons. But in this case, the pros are the values you're leaning into or the ways you're advocating for something that's really important. And the cons are the potential risk you might face for speaking up. So maybe we can start by listing out some of the reasons why it feels important to you to report your boss to HR, and then we'll get to the potential risks after. Does that sound good? And I also help them problem solve and work through, like, hey, if these kinds of backlashes do come up for you, do you feel ready to face them? If you would like to work on feeling more ready to face them, is that something you'd like to do here? Are there any that you don't feel ready to face? Let's talk about those. The next category of courage that this article talks about is emotional courage. Quote, emotional courage involves allowing ourselves to feel the full spectrum of human emotions. In some situations, we may try to protect ourselves by appearing aloof, uncaring, or disconnected. But people with emotional courage proceed into emotional relationships with the knowledge that they may be emotionally impacted by that relationship at some point in the future. And some examples the article gives of emotional courage include falling in love, reuniting with estranged parents, and seeking therapy. Oh, hello, that's us. Yeah, the act of coming to see a therapist itself is a form of emotional courage. Whew, this is weird. I've never been to therapy before. Sorry, it's kind of scary. It is. Most people feel that way coming in, especially if it's your first time. Are there certain parts in particular you feel scared about? Gosh, probably the whole thing, but I guess I'm also just someone who doesn't usually talk about my emotions, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna do that in therapy. That makes sense. There's usually a good reason behind why we don't talk about our emotions, so it takes a ton of courage just to be here knowing we're going to get to your emotions in therapy. Honestly, if someone gets to the point of reaching out to me, let alone scheduling an appointment, I know they've already jumped through a bunch of mental and emotional hoops to get to that point. So just the fact that you're even here is a big deal. Sounds good. Thanks. And a couple of other examples of courage this article lists I think are really interesting, though I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them in this episode. One is intellectual courage. Quote, "Intellectual courage is the willingness to learn and expand our horizon. This is a type of courage that's in decline in a world where everyone is retreating into information bubbles, overdosing on confirmation bias, and embracing cancel culture." Ooh, yes. The last type of courage is spiritual courage. Let's see what they say about that. Quote, "Spiritual courage is the courage to face up to spiritual questions that may be uncomfortable, a threat to your own identity as a spiritual person, or undermine your own spiritual beliefs. It's similar to intellectual courage. However, where intellectual courage is the willingness to address issues of logic and information, spiritual courage ventures into philosophical questions that are often unanswerable." Well, I would love to just trail off on this endlessly, like the idea that helping folks be more courageous is also inherently helping folks be more authentic. And that the idea of seeking authenticity is inherently challenging. If we wish to stand by our values, it's going to, at least at times, put us in a position where we need to practice moral courage. Or if we want to be people who genuinely seek the truth, then we need to be open to intellectual courage. If we want to support our clients in embracing all aspects of who they are, then we need to foster emotional courage, because there's going to be things in there that are challenging. So I would make an argument that being authentic requires courage on so many fronts. And I wish that this aspect of kind of what we're doing in therapy were talked about more. Anywho, this episode feels like I just shared some thoughts, but I hope that it got your thought juices flowing. Like, what do you think about courage? How does courage show up in your practice? How can we teach our clients to be courageous in a way that supports them moving towards their therapeutic goals? I'd love for this to be a conversation we keep having, and something tells me this is a key component of effective therapy. Like, I don't see how it's not, but it's fascinating to me that there's just so little research on this. Like, there's some momentum on the research in the last decade or so, but still so little. So we would love some more research, specifically in therapy, not just in the workplace, okay? And before we close, I'd like to thank therapynotes.com for sponsoring this video. Therapy Notes helps with all of your practice management needs, from scheduling to notes to billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform included for all users and a whole suite of AI features to streamline your documentation process. If you'd like to check out Therapy Notes, including their whole suite of AI features, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, I hope you found this episode helpful. Thank you for joining me in this sort of like meandering conversation. I hope you found it supportive, both in how you interact with your clients, but maybe also how you view yourself and your own, courageousness. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.